Sonja, 4 Republicans speaking on behalf of a Democrat tonight. What do you make of it?
You know, I think that that's 3 more than we have on the debate stage tonight, the convention stage for Latinos. And that's frankly a shame if we think through what the opportunity here is for the party to mobilize voters of color, particularly 2 groups for which there were Democratic candidates during the primary, Andrew Yang and Julian Castro, and making sure that communities see themselves represented. I think that the running mate pick of Senator Kamala Harris is definitely doing a lot of wonders for the Democratic Party, both in terms of fundraising, but representation. I want to get to Matt's point about Sanders. I think that Sanders did come out for Secretary Clinton in the 2016 cycle. The difference today is making sure that there is a clear threat, as Matt mentioned, which is Donald Trump remaining 4 more years in the White House for this country. And I think that's emblematic of where the nation is, irrespective of your political party, based on the coronavirus pandemic. We know that the Democrats are trying the persuasion game and really trying to persuade voters, those who voted for Trump in 2016, to vote for VP Biden in November.
And then, of course, Michelle Obama being the keynote speaker for tonight. Sonja, what can we expect from her? Attacks on Trump? And also, do we expect her, as we would think, to mobilize women and minorities to vote for Joe Biden?
I think the First Lady is one of the best surrogates any campaign can have with them, especially in this very important time where our nation is in chaos, not only with the coronavirus pandemic, but also with worsening inequality. The First Lady's message is going to be to get out to vote, which it always has been, but to double down on what's at stake. One of the things that the First Lady has been very clear about in her new philanthropic endeavors is the role of the Democratic Party in providing support for working families, for children, and for women. We know that Black women are the linchpin of the Democratic Party. We also know that people like the Vice President's running mate, Kamala Harris, will help energize some voters. That said, I think that the First Lady is really going to provide that stewardship and that support based on a very deep personal relationship with VP Biden, and that goes a long way.
If you've been watching the convention for the last hour, 9 minutes that it's been on, is just how short these speeches are. And, you know, this is supposed to energize the Democratic base, those voters that are undecided. Do you feel that that's even happening right now with this kind of presentation that we are forced to have because of the pandemic?
I think, you know, you have to make whatever is possible work right now. And the most important thing is that people are sheltering in place and physically distancing, and that they're not in Milwaukee spreading COVID-19 as our country continues to be an abysmal failure in dealing with this pandemic. That said, some of the speeches, particularly those of non-elected officials, have been great. Kristen Urquiza talking about her father's death from COVID-19 as a 65-year-old who was in good health and blaming it on the president was really dynamic and underscores what's at stake in November.
Sonja Diaz, what do you make of this? I mean, obviously, time will tell. None of us knows how this is going to be received until it's actually received or not received. I mean, you're watching this along with the rest of us for the first time. Are they breaking through? Are they connecting?
I really think that the people that are connecting with viewers are those, again, that are not holding elected office or up for re-election. These are people like George Floyd's family members who are making clear that the third most important issue to Black and Latino voters in this country, dealing with racial inequality and discrimination, is front and center, and not ignoring the movement that has brought us here to really start thinking through structural and systems change instead of where we were when the Democratic primary started, really a spectrum from moderation and incrementalism to widespread changes, whether they were with our banking and financial institutions to our healthcare system. We're at a place right now that the DNC digital convening is really showing is meeting the moment. I agree in terms of the disjointed nature of some of the speakers, but again, there's widespread diversity in tonight's events. And we're probably going to see some of the more dynamic speakers later this evening. So I'm really looking forward to what they have to say.
Sonja, that's exactly what they're going for, is the women in the suburbs and the battleground states. That's why this was originally planned, in Milwaukee. Hillary Clinton in 2016 and her campaign forgot about Wisconsin. And so they're trying to make sure that this time around it doesn't vote red, it votes blue.
Again, this is about persuasion and not expansion. It's also about elevating the role and the capacity of female leaders, particularly those in the United States Senate. Prior to Senator Klobuchar giving her live speech, we saw a taped interview from Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, the first Latina ever elected to the United States Senate, one of only 5 women of color in a body that has 69 white men. So this is really trying to do what we heard about VP Biden's search for a running mate, which is to elevate all women. And we definitely saw that with Amy Klobuchar in her Smile So Wide, reaffirming her belief that VP Biden is the best person for the job, even remarking that she was joyous the day that she said that she was ending her campaign. So all of this leads us to 80 days in counting about whether or not voters, especially those in the Midwest, are going to not only vote, but are going to change their vote for those white voters, including white women who went with Donald Trump in 2016.
Sonja, I want to let you in on this before we hear from Senator Sanders. Your thoughts on what he needs to do tonight to unite. I mean, there's a lot of distance between his platform and that of Joe Biden.
I think he needs to mobilize and motivate young folks and people of color. We know through our own data and research at UCLA that voters of color, particularly Latinos and some Asian Americans, in a number of the Democratic primary contests, including Iowa, including Nevada, and in parts of Texas, overwhelmingly went in support of Senator Sanders. And where VP Biden did get a plurality of votes, it was simply a plurality in places like Florida. So Senator Sanders tonight is really encouraging voters that voted for him and are supportive of his policy platform that they need to come out on November 3rd, that there is work still to be done, and that we cannot afford to have 4 more years of Donald Trump, especially amidst growing income inequality, racial injustice, and the coronavirus pandemic that has disproportionately impacted communities of color, even here in California.
Back with the DNC convention, night 2.
Let's dig a little deeper on what to expect. We're joined by our KTLA 5 panel of political analysts, political consultant Matt Klink, civil rights attorney and policy advisor Sonja Diaz, and Dakota communications consultant Kerman Maddox. And let's start with you, Sonja. We've got AOC on deck, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Everybody's been talking about how she's only got 1 minute to deliver her message. But do you think that that might actually be strategy by the DNC? Considering the medium today is to retweet, TikTok, whatever it might be, just a 1-minute video versus something like Michelle Obama's speech last night, which ran nearly 18 minutes?
Absolutely, there's strategy involved. Whether or not it's to reduce the representative from New York to 60 seconds for TikTok purposes is likely not the case. We know that tonight is about the Democratic National Committee conveying who Biden is and what he represents. We're going to see that from Dr. Jill Biden. We're going to see that from 2 former presidents, one of whom is still the 5th most popular Democrat in the country. And I'll note that the convention tonight started with a montage of up-and-coming stars, all of whom endorsed Biden, including 2, one of whom got a lot of support from our revolution in the South. And then another represents a state senator, Ivania Cancela, the first Latina ever elected to the Nevada state legislature, early Biden endorser, even though Latinos in the state of Nevada caucused in favor of Bernie Sanders. So this is not about AOC. It's about thinking about who the DNC wants to convey. That's a nice foil to President Trump's message that Biden is liberal and left, and really trying to attack that line of inquiry and of criticism.
In an effort to try and unite, Sonja, it appears this may well divide. How do you respond to this if you're the party's leader?
It's a symbolic endorsement. This is a convention, albeit a digital one. This is important to have up and coming leaders. Tonight is about leadership. We've seen through the speakers thus far to really focus on the party's past. And that seems tailor made for a persuasion game that is looking at the Midwest and not at the South, the Southeast, or millennials and young voters of color. So if they are, in fact, talking about AOC, I think that's ultimately good for the party because one can imagine that that means that they're not going to be supporting Trump. Again, 60 seconds, and AOC didn't have a central role in the discussion about Joe Biden. And this is how she yielded her time.
Sonja, do you agree?
Look, this is just part of the convention, like I mentioned earlier. She had to second the nomination. She was a surrogate for Bernie and vice versa through her short time in Congress, which I believe is going to continue to be a storied career. Her and her colleagues in the House are diverse. They represent very important urban areas in this country and are some of the hardest hit, not just economically, but because of the coronavirus pandemic. Tonight was about going back to normal, which is really odd because one of the things that was very clear is that nobody wants to go back to a normal where people are homeless, where people don't have access to health care, where people are sent away to wars without knowing when they're going to see their friends and family again. And so to the extent that Representative Ocasio-Cortez added anything, it was actually 60 seconds of a platform and a policy that we saw a lot of yesterday. Today was really providing this holistic view that 4 more years of Trump is not good for anybody, and that the answer is Joe Biden.
Sonja, talk to me about what your analysis is about what he said about those groups of people, and does he actually hit the mark, especially with women, considering his history?
Look, one of the things that I think is important to note is that most Democratic voters still think very favorably of President Clinton. And what's important is that President Clinton's remarks today and Senator Sanders' remarks yesterday were very policy heavy. It wasn't the character, the empathy, the decency that we've been hearing through other vignettes and other speakers. Today, it was about leadership, and it was also a little bit about President Trump not being able to do the job. And that's clear. It's persuasive from someone who had the job for 8 years. In terms of the demographic outreach, look, President Clinton had a strong rapport and still has a strong rapport with Black Americans. In terms of the 2016 presidential cycle and the way in which Secretary Hillary Clinton was able to pull votes from Black women, they were higher than with President Obama in 2012, and even Latino voters who overwhelmingly supported Secretary Clinton. President Clinton is right to think through the diversity and the gender issue. Diversity because that's the future of the country. The gender issue is because that's what we need to move forward as we're dealing with the coronavirus where kids and our mature Americans are dying.
And Sonja, we would love to hear from you. Of course, a big night for women of color, as Kamala makes history tonight, accepting that VP nomination.
It's an absolutely historical night that's on the eve of the centennial celebration of the 19th Amendment, which really was a movement for women to vote, but left behind so many voices, including those of Indigenous women, Black women, and of course, Latina women. So Senator Harris tonight is embracing the future. Like Matt said, I'm 100% in alignment that this is a night about women. It's a night about the future of this country, what the party will look like. And it's going to be a story that is told by young girls, by millennials, and by women who are not baby boomers front and center. And this includes Senator Harris, her sister Maya Harris, a civil rights attorney, former senior advisor to Secretary Hillary Clinton, and her niece, Mina Harris, an entrepreneur. So these are fresh faces that are going to continue to show us the diaspora of female leadership, particularly what they term Black girl magic.
And to Matt Klink's point, an opportunity for Kamala Harris to talk about what voters can vote for rather than what they should vote against. Thanks to our panel, and we'll check back with you throughout our coverage tonight. A key night for Democrats. Let's welcome back KTLA 5's panel of political analysts. And Sonja, let's begin with you. We're hearing, of course, from President Barack Obama tonight, who is arguably the Democrat Party's brightest star to this day. And from what we're hearing, his support for Joe Biden is unequivocal, but that he does have concern about Joe Biden's support among younger black voters and the general interest of young voters across all ethnic lines. What are you hearing, and do you see that as a point of concern?
Well, the president, I think, is really excited to welcome one of his close friends, Senator Kamala Harris, to the stage. And adding Senator Harris to the ticket has already shown through recent polling to increase the likelihood of Black and Latino voters to support the Democratic ticket. What I know is that all of these voters of color need to be mobilized. They need to be asked for their vote, and they need to be able to cast a ballot during the coronavirus pandemic. And this includes universal vote by mail, which they frankly do not know the most about, and also are likely to live in some of our states that have the most egregious voter suppression.
Kerman Maddox, to you, we know the initial impact. And Sonja Diaz, we understand that Secretary Clinton has told confidants that she sees Kamala Harris as sort of a next generational leader. Your impressions of her 5 minutes on the stage?
You know, Secretary Clinton went in there and did what she had to do, which was to say, look, don't sit this one out. If you do, our country will not survive. And it's really important to put this into context. The people watching this are likely engaged in the election. Those that sat out or are planning to sit out are likely not watching the convention tonight. So what Clinton is doing is really raising the stakes. You can still win the popular vote and lose the election. And we simply cannot let that happen, was her message. She hearkened back to her 2016 campaign message of stronger together. And she also made clear that President Trump's question in 16 on the campaign trail of taking a risk and what's the worst thing that can happen is clear the chaos that we live in right now. And so this is really, don't sit this one out. You need to vote. And the ticket is strong.
You just heard, as you said, from Nancy Pelosi, a lot of strong women coming on tonight for night 3 of the DNC, as they should, with Kamala Harris being the VP pick for tonight, accepting that VP nomination. I want to talk a little bit about Nancy Pelosi's speech. Tell me what you think the 24-hour news cycle is going to be on what she said tonight. And we'll start with Sonja.
I think Pelosi was pretty clear that she's playing a win in November, and it's not keeping the seats that were flipped in the historic 2018 midterms, but it's going further and not just preserving them, thinking about what other seats are up for grabs, because she seems to be wanting to provide a Democratic president in 2020 with the Congress necessary to continue to lead into the 2022 midterms. So she came guns blazing and she shouted out the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, as one of the people, in addition to the president, as being the biggest barriers for the American people during the coronavirus pandemic. So I think Pelosi has clarified her attack, and it's up to the other side in the Republican Party next week to see how they intend to villainize her or try and fight back for seats in Orange County and elsewhere across the country that they lost in 2018.
Sonja, you know, of course, we all have been hearing about this big tent that the Democrats have pitched, that, you know, everybody is welcome, from the progressives all the way to Republicans who want to vote for Biden. What do you expect to hear from Joe Biden's speech tonight?
I expect to hear how the party is going to be a big tent, frankly. We saw that a bit tonight already with some of the videos in the montage, including the first trans delegate in the Virginia House of Commons, which is a remarkable feat. But what VP Biden has to do tonight is to talk about what America will look like in January 2021. And he needs to sell that future to the American public, particularly to voters who maybe want to sit this one out or are not enthusiastic about the ticket. He needs to sell us a future that doesn't have Americans dying unnecessarily, doesn't have Americans losing shelter and foreclosure on the horizon, but one of opportunity and prosperity. And I think that if he tells that story, it will be a really positive event for his campaign.
A speech we anticipate around 7:45 and one we will carry here live. And stay with us, panel. Thanks as always, and we'll see you shortly. Let's bring in our KTLA 5 panel of political analysts, political consultant and analyst Matt Klink, civil rights attorney and policy advisor Sonja Diaz, and Dakota communications consultant Kerman Maddox. Sonja, first to you. Joe Biden coming off a long and exhausting process of finding a running mate, and in the process having a whole lot of conversation with a whole lot of candidates that represent a diverse background politically, ideologically, personally. You have to believe those conversations to some degree helped him inform his thinking as he prepares to address the nation tonight.
That's a really good way of framing it. President Biden was true to his word that he would anoint a running mate that identified as a woman, and he has done that. He's chosen a Black woman. Again, Black women are the linchpin of the Democratic Party. They, more than any other demographic group, vote for Democrats every single election. And they were key to Obama's victories. They also came out in support of Secretary Clinton more than any group. With that, there are other women, in addition to Black leaders here in California, like Representative Bass. We have gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams in Georgia, along with the mayor of Atlanta who just spoke, and people in the Midwest who are really important for that persuasion game that we think the Democratic Party is pursuing. No matter what, all of these women have informed VP Biden's thoughts about how best to reach out to this important electorate. Remember, 54% of white women supported Trump in 2016. But also, what are the needs of these voters? What is the policy platform? And that's something I hope to hear more about when VP Biden takes the stage tonight.
Sonja, this candidate is as qualified as they come to communicate empathy and a sense of hope. Certainly what this country needs in this moment, all that's happened in this strangest of years. What do you expect?
I expect VP Biden to talk about the systems that need changing and how he's going to change them. Under Trump's leadership, the first thing that the Republican Party tried to do was gut the ACA. And today, so many Americans have access to deal with the coronavirus pandemic because of the Affordable Care Act, for which VP Biden had a central role in whipping votes in the U.S. Congress. I think healthcare is top of mind, and he should lean into that. I think the second thing is jobs. One of the things his campaign has made clear is that they want to invest $2 trillion in infrastructure. This is something that President Trump has said over and over again on the campaign trail, that he's going to bring jobs back to America. He's going to keep them here. And over the course of the last 4 years, we've seen more job losses than in American history. So if Joe Biden can talk about two things, I think it's health and jobs.
Kind of jumping off from what you were saying, Sonja, it's about jobs. It's about the pandemic. And, we want to see that the president, that he has that presidential look is what we're going for, and that he is up for the job.
That's exactly right. I think that Senator Booker was one of a few candidates in the large Democratic Party who had a speaking role. We also heard from Andrew Yang. And it's important to note what is driving American voters and what's driven them to VP Biden as the Democratic nominee. And that is jobs and healthcare. Now, there are some things that nobody foresaw. And that was the coronavirus pandemic and rising, worsening inequality based on racial disparities. So I think if Biden can just talk about being a strong, even-keeled hand based on his experience in the United States Senate and him being the top lieutenant to President Obama, voters will feel like they have somebody who can make decisions and resume American prominence on an international stage.